Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we're going to do a Getting Started in Plasticity for Beginners, but unlike our other Getting Started videos, we're going to tackle a simple project that you can 3D print or you can design your own variation of. So in today's video, we're going to be creating a holder for a key fob that you can hang on the wall. Now, this is something that I created simply because I hated the way that my key fobs for my vehicles hung on the wall, and I wanted to create something that was a little bit more precise that held the keys, very securely, as opposed to just a little hook or a nail in the wall. So what we have here is a key fob holder for a current Ford F-Series. We're going to walk through the process of how to go about that. Whether you have a Ford truck or you have any other vehicle, you can use the same process that we're going to use here today. Now, I will say that if you're looking for other getting started content, some of the content we have in version 24 and older is still valid as long as you know where to access the tools. So we did a What's New in 25.1 video where we talked about tool access, and that should give you enough information to get started if you are trying to look at some of that older content. But in today's video, we're going to walk through a little bit of the UI, make sure that you're comfortable with a couple of key elements, and then we're going to dive into creating our new design. So first things first, I'm going to start a new file, and the new file is going to start with a cube. Now, the first thing that we want to do before we delete the cube or do anything is get comfortable with our navigation controls. So if you're using the default settings, holding the middle mouse wheel down and simply moving it up and down and left and right is going to allow you to orbit. Holding down the right mouse button is going to allow you to pan, and using the mouse wheel will allow you to zoom in. This is going to be the most common way that you navigate. Keep in mind also the right mouse button is a click to confirm. So if you're doing something like drawing a line or extruding and you want to OK that operation, you can hit enter on the keyboard, you can hit OK in the dialogues, or you can right click to confirm, which is a really quick way that we can model. So once you're happy and comfortable with moving this around, then we want to talk about setting up your user interface. So in the P drop-down menu, you can go to Preferences, and inside of the preferences, you can play around with a couple of different navigation options. Now, if you happen to be on a laptop with a touchpad, I did a video specifically about setting up and using a laptop in Plasticity, and want to make sure that I'll put a link to that video in the description, but check that out if you're having difficulty not having a numpad and not having access to an actual mouse. If you are coming from another program like Blender or Maya or Moai, then you can go ahead and just use those defaults if you want. Everything I'm going to be doing uses all of the default settings for Plasticity. So if you want to follow along with me, I would suggest sticking with Plasticity default. Or if you're on a laptop, make sure you check out that video first and get comfortable, at very least, rotating your object around, zooming in and out, and panning it. So once we have that down, it's also important that we understand tool access. On the left-hand side, this menu here can be moved around and redocked on the right and the left. This is going to be where we access our curves, as well as some primitive tools like creating a primitive sphere, a box, a cylinder, and we've also got access to our measure tool. These are going to be common tools that you're going to use over and over again to create geometry. If you want to learn the shortcuts for them, you can hover over any of the commands that have a shortcut and it'll list it there for you. So Shift and A for the line. Also note that Shift and R is going to be repeat the last command. So even if you're using something like this control point curve that doesn't have an option for a shortcut by default, you can use Shift and R, and then you can go ahead and create another one after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and delete these. We don't need to worry about them, but the curves are going to be over here. For this video, we're really only going to use the line as well as the corner rectangle. The bottom area has a couple of common tools that we're going to be using like move, rotate, and scale. And it also has other tools like boolean, which is where we combine solid bodies or subtract one body from another. There are some options for different types of arrays. And then we have this 3-dot menu on the bottom right. And these are going to be our contextual or suggested tools. You'll notice right now that most of them are grayed out because we have nothing selected. There's not really anything that we can do. We could create a curve array or we could cut our solid object with something. But for the most part, these tools are going to be displayed when we have a proper selection available. The magnifying glass on the bottom left, this is going to allow us to search all commands. If you have a command that you use all the time that doesn't have a shortcut, you can add it to this quick selection menu by using the three dots on the right-hand side and going ahead and setting it to your add to favorites. So for example, alternative duplicate, if I didn't know the shortcut or I used it all the time, I could simply add it to this menu. The more that we add here, the smaller these buttons are going to become. And if you want to remove them, you simply go back to that command and then we select remove from favorites. So this is a great way that we can add tools that we use all the time or frequently, but we don't have a shortcut or we don't want to set up a shortcut. As a new user, I understand that shortcuts are tricky. You're learning a new program. You don't want to learn shortcuts. But I will say that Plasticity works a lot better once you get comfortable with just a few basic shortcuts for things like move, rotate, and scale, as well as shortcuts for accessing things like the line. Those are going to be ones that you use all the time. And rather than moving the cursor all the way around the screen, it's much easier if you can remember those shortcuts. A couple of other things to note is this menu down here can be brought up with the F key. I think of it as finding the tool that we want. This menu down here can be brought up by using the Shift and F key. So F to search or Shift and F for our suggested tools that are contextual. The benefit of understanding those shortcuts is that it's going to place it wherever your cursor is. So if you have favorite tools that you use all the time, anytime you click F, it's going to be right here next to your cursor. If you want to see contextual tools based on your selection, Shift and F will show you what you can do. Keep in mind that this is not all commands that are available. These are just the most common ones. With all that said, the panel on the right-hand side is also important. There are a few things we want to make sure we understand here. We have object snapping turned on, and specifically all of the object snap options. We want to make sure those are on. In our unit section for this video, make sure that we are set to millimeters. I'm going to set my grid size to 250 and the accent lines every 25. And then also note that we do have some options for other areas of the software. So for example, if we want to toggle on rendering, we can toggle this on and off, change the material that's on our object. Not really important for what we're doing today, but a lot of the stuff over here on this right-hand panel can be very useful. We do want to note that some of these options do have shortcuts. So for example, toggling on and off orthographic or perspective view is the number 5 on our number pad. Keep in mind that the numpad and the numbers across the top of the keyboard are different. They do inherently have different functions. The numbers across the top of the keyboard are going to be your selection filter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 will reselect all of them. If you hit tab when you don't have any other commands going, that will also reselect all of them for you. All right, so with all that out of the way, you should be comfortable with moving the objects around, panning and rotating. You should also have a good idea of where things are located. Now we can get started creating our new part. So the first step in this process is to get the key fob that you want to create a holder for. Get a piece of paper, preferably graph or grid paper, something that has a measurement reference on it. If you don't have that, then I suggest you take a ruler and put some sort of measurement reference marks on the paper itself so that we can scale it properly. Then we want to just trace our object, in this case the key fob, from both the top-down view as well as the thickness or the side. If you have something that has sort of a funky shape to it, we always want to make sure we understand what that looks like from a side view. You could alternately just measure how thick it is. So you could use simple measurements. But for us, tracing it is going to be the most simple or basic, straightforward way that we can get a semi-complex shape. Once we have that, if you do have access to a scanner, scan that into your computer. If you don't have access to a scanner, just take a picture of it with your phone and make sure that you can bring it into your computer so you have it available. Now that we've got an image available, I'm going to select the view cube or the cube that starts in Plasticity and hit either delete or X on the keyboard. With nothing else selected, we can use /, which will allow us to zoom into our grid area. And then we can go to our P drop-down menu and select Import Append. For Import Append, we want to find the location of our key fob tracing, select Open, and bring it in. This is the point where we really need to understand the scale because right now it's extremely small. The first thing that I suggest we do is get to a construction plane because when we start to create new curves, lines, splines, arcs, and things of that nature, when we have an active construction plane, this means that the geometry is going to snap to that by default, and this is going to help us make sure everything's in the right location. So in order to do that, let's first go to a top view by clicking on the top of our view cube. With our object selected, I'm going to use /, which will zoom into it. And then I'm going to start a new line. The line tool from the origin, I'm going to drag out to the left and then hit my tab key. Because for me, the distance between the points on my reference paper is 5 millimeters, I'm going to create a 5 millimeter line and hit enter. This tells me that the image that I brought in is way too small. If you happen to create a mark on your paper that was 25 millimeters long, or if you have grid paper that's at 10 millimeters, then you would want to make sure your line is appropriately sized. Now we need to scale the image up. So we're going to select the image, use scale, and then we're going to grab this plane option here and scale up in plane. You may need to do this a couple of times based on how big or small your image is. We're going to go ahead and keep scaling and zoom out a little bit. And if you happen to lose this sort of object here way up in the corner, you can always redo the scale operation. So right click to confirm, and then we can do scale again and it'll bring it back in here. So essentially what I'm looking for is to get my 5 millimeter line to be approximately the distance between the 2 points on my paper. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to right click to confirm, select the line and hit delete or X. Again, to zoom to fit, we can use /. This will zoom to fit any selected objects. If nothing is selected, it'll zoom to fit everything that's visible. Once again, we want to go back to our top view. We're going to select our paper and we're going to use move. Once again, we're going to select the option to move it in plane. I'm going to pull this over so that it's roughly at the center. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to get it as close as possible. Also note the position that I have here is based on the fact that this key fob gets wide here and then tapers back in. I'm only going to be modeling from this widest section and down, because if I were to model anything above this, the key fob wouldn't be able to slide in from the top. So get it roughly centered on your object. And again, you can use the move tool. If you need to get very precise, just move it until you're happy with it. Right click to confirm. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that the image is selected in our outliner on the left-hand side, and then move our cursor into this area anywhere in the grid or modeling area, and hit the shortcut key M on the keyboard. This is material, and this is how we could apply a different material to our solid or surface objects, but here the only thing we're concerned about is the opacity. I'm going to bring the opacity down, so really I'm just looking at my tracing and I'm not seeing as much of the white background, and then right-click to confirm. The last thing I want to do with this is click on the lock icon, which will prevent me from selecting it here in the modeling window. I'm going to go ahead and move this with my right mouse button, and I want to start with my line tool. I'm going to go from the origin and down as a reference line, and I'm going to right click to OK that. This reference line is not necessarily needed, but it just helps me when I'm creating something that does have symmetry to have a vertical reference line in the middle of my object that I can use as a snap location. Then I'm going to start the line tool again. I'm going to come from this upper position out to my widest point. And as I begin dragging down, I want to know where I'm horizontal to this point. So I'm going to hover over it, tap the shift key. This is going to bring up my snaps. And I want to go until I'm roughly at the same taper angle here. Left click to confirm, and then snap back to the origin point at the bottom of that line and right click to accept. With everything here selected, we're going to mirror this by going to our tool menu, which is again Shift and F or the 3 dots. We're going to select mirror, click on the right red section, which is mirroring in X, and right click to confirm. Now I want to select the line in the middle and delete it. I don't need it, it was only a temporary reference. Then I want to select the lines on the right, Shift select the lines on the left, go to my menu, and I want to use the join tool. Again, shortcut keys exist for most of these things, so if you want to use those, get comfortable with it. J for join, Alt and J to unjoin, which can be pretty helpful as well. A lot of these tools also work whether you're talking about curves or sheets or other bodies. So for example, you can join multiple surfaces or sheets together, or you can join multiple curves together. So the same shortcut key will apply for both of those. The last thing that we want to do here before we turn this into a solid is we want to round these bottom corners off. This can be done at the curve level here, or we could do it at the solid level later. But if you want to apply these at the curve level, we can simply select these points, hold down Shift, and then we're going to use the shortcut B as in boy on the keyboard, or again, come to our contextual menu and select Fillet. We can then pull this one direction to create a round or a fillet, or the other direction to create a flat or a chamfer. So what I'm going to do is begin pulling this out the direction I want, noting the value here is positive. If I go to a chamfer, the value is negative. This is also true when we get to our solids. I'm going to use an 8mm radius, hit enter, enter again to confirm, and then I can rotate this around. We can hide the key fob image, select the profile, and by default, plasticity will be on the extrude tool for us. Now, if you happen to turn this option off, all you really need to do is hit E for extrude or come down to your contextual menu, and extrude is going to be in here as well. But we're going to begin pulling this up. The white circle is going to be taper or draft, and we're going to leave that alone for this example, but I want to manually enter a value of 25mm. Hit enter again, and now we've got a solid object. We need to keep in mind that the curve is still visible here. I'm going to hide it instead of deleting it because I may need it later. If I need to make a change or try to create another object, I want to keep that same curve there. Now I'm going to select the object, then the bottom edge, and begin pulling this away. I'm going to set this to 8mm and hit enter. But before I confirm this, I'm going to hold down the Control key, which will let me add to my selection. Click on another edge on the top and let go, and then right click to confirm. So now I've rounded everything out with those 8mm fillets. The next task for me to do is to hollow this or create a thinned wall feature. To do this, we need to select the solid object again, select a face, hold down Shift to add more faces to our selection. And once we have all the faces that we're interested in, so the top, the front, and a portion of the bottom, we're going to use the find or search command and start to type in hollow. Once we have only a single command in the list below, all we need to do is hit the enter key, and then we need to enter a value in our thickness. For this object, I'm going to use -2mm. Hit enter, and now we've created a thin-walled part. If we put a positive value in here, let's say +2mm, it's going to take our solid body and it's going to create it thickened outward as a thin shell. In this case, I created the design as the outside, so I want to use -2 and hit enter. Now we've got something that would probably work as is, but we want to make it a little nicer. So what I want to do is select the object again, select the inside face, and I want to create a temporary construction plane. You can do this by clicking plane from selection, and then we can also use the space bar, which will also create that temporary construction plane based on our selection. Now we're going to select our corner rectangle. Note that anytime you see a small white arrow in the bottom right corner, you can hold down the left mouse button to bring other options up. So for example, I could use a center rectangle, and I could snap it to a center location. Then I can right click to confirm. Now I'm going to select each of these regions. Because we use a construction plane based on a face, it automatically brought in its profile. But we want to select those 3 regions and pull them up until they're all the way through our solid object and right click to confirm. Now the reason we did this as opposed to just removing it automatically is because I don't want this extrude to start from that plane. And instead of going through the process of using measurements in the dialog and potentially offsetting one way or the other, it's very easy for us once we get comfortable with those shortcut keys to just OK the operation and then use G for move. And we can hit the Z key on the keyboard, which will lock it to the Z orientation, and we can pull it up. We can also use Tab to change the way that some of these operations work. Sometimes Tab will jump over to the dimension dialog. Sometimes Tab has alternate function, like going from a center extrude to a symmetric extrude. But in this case, what we want to do is enter 2mm in Z, moving it a specific amount, and hitting enter. Now we're going to select the original object. We're going to use Boolean, which is Q on the keyboard. Then we're going to select the extrude we just created and right click to confirm. This rectangle isn't needed anymore, but you can always go and hide it with H on the keyboard or simply hit the eyeball icon in the outliner on the left side, and then X to get off our temporary construction plane. So now we've got something that can hold the key, but we want to round off the corners and make it a little bit nicer. Now, it's important to note that Plasticity is a direct modeler, meaning that we don't really have a link back to that rectangle. If I happen to go and change the rectangle size, it's not going to affect the cut that we made. However, because it is such a good direct modeler, we can do things like select faces. In this case, let's go ahead and shift select this one and simply move them. So if we want to move them down further or move them more this way, we can make that change after the fact pretty easily. And again, we can manually input numbers. So let's say -6 mm and right click to confirm. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and round off some of these corners. So I'm going to begin to round this off, and then I'm going to hold down the Control key to add to my selection, and I'm just going to grab all of the other corners that are on this object. You can also hold down the Control key and do a box selection from the top left to bottom right, and as long as the edge that you're interested in is completely encompassed in the selection box, it'll be added. Keep in mind that if you go from, if you're actually going too far and you're encompassing more than one edge, it's going to add it to that selection as well. So you do need to be careful with that functionality. Let's make sure that we did get all the edges. That looks okay. And I'll right click to confirm. And now I want to add a small chamfer here. Notice that the chamfer doesn't carry on everywhere, so we need to hold down the Control key and add to the selection. We can add to the outside, and I'm going to make this a bit smaller at -0.5. And let's go ahead and hold down the Control key, just making sure that it's added everywhere. It's a good idea to rotate around, make sure that all the edges are tapered, and then right click to confirm. The last thing that we need to do here is add some holes. So once again, spacebar to create a temporary construction plane. We're going to use our circle tool, and I'm going to hit tab and make a 6 mm hole. With it selected, I'm going to duplicate it and move it up in Y and create a second hole. While the second hole isn't necessarily needed, it can be helpful to have multiple mounting options. Select both profiles, pull them down through, and in the bottom right, our shortcut has an option called difference. So if we hit W on the keyboard, then select our object, it'll cut through right now without having to make a solid and go back and doing a Boolean operation. So off the temporary construction plane, hide the two circles, and the last step is to add a chamfer to this so that we can have a countersunk screw so it doesn't hang up on the key fob. Hold down Control to add to the selection, and then right click to accept. So now at this point, the key fob holder is done. Now I've already made a couple of these, so I know that they work. But if we want to take this into 3D printing or add more detail here, we can certainly do that. The first thing that you want to do is save it. So File, Save. Make sure that you're in the right location. I keep all my data sets in here. And I'm going to call this one Key Fob Forward. And now we need to get this design out into a print slicer. Depending on the printer that you're using, most slicers have now started to accept a step file, so you don't necessarily have to convert it to a mesh file when you're going from Plasticity to, say, a Prusa slicer or something like that. What I'm going to do is go to my export option, and we need to make sure that we're exporting as an STL or an OBJ or some mesh file if your slicer can only accept a mesh. I'm just going to go ahead and go with STL. I'm going to select Save, and we've got a preview on the screen of the density. You don't need to go crazy with the density, but since we do have rounded corners and we may want a little bit higher resolution, I'm going to start to crank this up a bit higher. For such a small file, a small part, we really don't have to worry too much about file size, but it can be detrimental on larger parts. So make sure that you do play around with this and only add the resolution that you need for your object. We're going to say OK. And this should create an STL export. Again, you can do this as a step file, as an OBJ, as many other different file types, depending on what your slicer will actually accept. Now for me, I'm going to send this to my Bamboo printer. So I'm going to open up the Bamboo Studio slicer. And basically just import it into my slicer. So once we're open, we are going to go to prepare. I'm going to add and forward key fob. Actually, let's go ahead and make sure that we're using the right one. Datasets 2700, key fob forward. All right, so this is the one that we just created. It's already in a good orientation, and when we're creating things for 3D printing, we always have to be concerned with support material. Now, I created this specifically in this orientation with the features that we have here, knowing full well that we would be able to print these overhangs without worrying about having any issues with support material. So all I need to do is slice the plate. It may give me a warning that there are cantilevered parts, but the big important thing here is that as we go through this, as the material is built vertically, we just need to make sure that the radius value in this case isn't too small. If it's too small and it makes that corner transition quicker, then we're going to have a potential problem where we're trying to build in air. Having a large radius value like this of 8 millimeters is plenty fine for my case. So now that we've got it sliced, we can see that it takes 17 cents of material and it prints in about 16 minutes. So not bad at all. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this on the printer, print it, and then we're going to check back in when it's done. All right, so everything's been printed. The key fob is done and it fits perfectly. I say perfectly, it's not meant to be a tight fit because that would be a pain having to get a key in and out. But the small tabs on the top are small enough that it's flexible enough that we can push a key into it, or we can not have to worry about it having such a tight fit. But in this case, this was a perfect solution. It didn't take that long to design or to 3D print. In a matter of less than 30 minutes, we could go from just tracing the key fob on a piece of paper to having a final design that we can 3D print and already have it 3D printed and ready to mount on the wall. So that's a pretty good turnaround time. If you're using this functionality for another type of key fob, just keep in mind that the direction that you're inserting the key or the key fob into the holder, make sure that you have enough material to hold it, but also enough area so that it's not so restricted when you're putting the key in or taking it out. Now, I found that with things like my Subaru key, that it works pretty well, even with a standard or a traditional key that's not this like switchblade style like the Ford one. It works pretty well. The key can get in and out okay, but it is a slightly different process or something else that we need to think about. So just again, depending on what key fob you're using, just consider that. Hopefully this video helped you understand how to use Plasticity as a new user, go through some of the basics of creating a somewhat simple part that looks more complex than it actually is, and designing your own parts for 3D printing. Now, if you have any questions on this or anything else with Plasticity, please let me know. Remember, if you are looking to purchase Plasticity, we are an affiliate, so you can use the code LEAD10 at checkout to save 10% and help the channel. We'll also leave that information and a link in the description that will take you to the Plasticity site. But once again, if you have any questions, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.